peuple en ce jour sans cesse répète malgré les mutins on réussira.
The Age of Reason, also called the Enlightenment, was a period from the late 16 to early 1800s, which sparked new models and systems of philosophy, ethics, science, and more. One of its goals was to remove traditional beliefs commonly held, as they were deemed shackles for the modern man. As we reflect on this age, which partook in a kind of secularization, we can easily see how the thought of men from the Enlightenment still lingers in today's modern age. The various systems of ethics that were produced during the Enlightenment are evidently erroneous, and therefore, since they have had lasting impacts on modern society, they have led to a type of moral decline in humanity. One popular Enlightenment writer was that of Voltaire, who wrote in the 1700s. In chapter 9 of his treatise on metaphysics, he gives his general outline of how he views morality. Ultimately, morality is grounded in the principles that ensure societal well-being. Good actions are those that preserve and benefit the collective, while evil actions disrupt and harm it. Virtue and vice, then, are not absolutes dictated by divine command, but pragmatic guidelines shaped by the needs and realities of human coexistence. So, according to Voltaire, morality is based on the well-being of society. Now, difficulties arise when one considers how the moral rules of the societies change over time and are also different in each individual society. Voltaire writes, "What is called virtue in one climate may be called vice in another, and most rules of good and evil vary like languages and clothing." And it seems that Voltaire's views end up in a type of moral relativism, where morality is different in each culture, and one can't really critique the other on an objective basis of morals. Interestingly, we observe in the modern day a similar thought, in that many people in one country are wary to critique the morality of another country or culture. They might simply say that it's their culture. This mindset is also seen with regard to the morality of the past. The modern man might simply say that people acted differently in the past, and so those moral actions were fine then, but not fine now. And so for Voltaire and the modern man, there really isn't any objective basis for me to critique the actions of another society, since their actions benefit the well-being of their society. It seems, though, that in a last-ditch effort, Voltaire tries to squander the idea of complete moral relativism. He thinks that there is some real basis in morals, and how does he prove or show evidence of this? Well, he writes, "He gave bees a powerful instinct to work and nourish themselves together, and he gave humans certain feelings from which they can never escape. Benevolence towards our species, for example, is innate within us, and always acts in us unless opposed by self-love, which often prevails." And so this moral conviction or feeling one has is in some sense our basis for knowing what is right. But an issue arises insofar as what does one do if they don't have the same moral intuitions or feelings? To give an analogy, a vegan may have pitiful remorse for the killing of an animal, whereas someone who eats meat may have no inclination or feeling at all. This moral system clearly doesn't provide a true basis for morals, and yet both Voltaire and the modern man seem to fall into this error. As a side note, if you want to help support me, consider buying my new released merchandise, which is based on St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. Thank you for any support. Another Enlightenment philosopher was that of Baron d'Holbach. He himself was a staunch atheist, and represents clearly modern secularization. He holds that without God, we can come to some type of moral truth. In his book on Good Sense Without God, he writes, "To discover the true principles of morality, men have no need of theology, of revelation, or of gods. They have need only of common sense. They have only to commune with themselves, to reflect upon their own nature, to consider the objects of society and of the individuals who compose it, and they will easily perceive that virtue is advantageous and vice is disadvantageous to themselves." For Baron, morality can be discovered simply by the means of reflection on oneself and their relation to others. And evidently an issue arises from this, that once you consider the materialism of Baron d'Holbach, his moral system seems to be meaningless, since he believes what constitutes the universe is just matter in motion. There is no real essence or nature as man, but these are just abstract categories. And so, how does one reflect on an abstract category of human nature? In Volume 1 of his System of Nature, Baron writes, Nature, therefore, in its most significant meaning, is the great whole that results from the collection of matter under its various combinations. Baron Dolbach writes further, these reflections naturally lead him to a knowledge of the morality most essential to social beings. Dangerous passions seldom fall to the lot of a man who loves to commune with himself, to study and to investigate the principles of things. From this passage, Baron boasts about the superiority of the man of reflection, and that he is morally astute. Yet in the same passage, he admits that this man can still fall into dangerous passions, although he believes it rarely does happen. Of course, though, Baron assumes that there exists some type of dangerous passion which he hasn't justified. Baron also desires a strict divorce of church and state, or in other words, of faith and politics, similarly to our own modern age. Yet once you throw out these principles, you are left with a society in which almost every man and woman differ on politics and how things should be done. No longer is there an objective basis of morals, but vain disputations and preferences. But nonetheless, let us proceed further. By far, one of the most revolutionary philosophers in the Enlightenment was that of Immanuel Kant, who, after he came out of his dogmatic slumbers, desired to synthesize two philosophical systems: the rationalism of men like Leibniz, and the empiricism or skepticism of men like David Hume. When it comes to morality, Kant made a distinction between the hypothetical and categorical imperative. The hypothetical imperative is simply the individual desires of man and the duty of completing it. Kant writes, a hypothetical imperative merely says that the action is good for some purpose that one could have or that one actually does have. An example would be that of a man who desires to fulfill a diet. This would be a moral action which is applicable to the individual man, but isn't necessarily universal. The universal of this imperative is called the categorical imperative. This is where Kant truly establishes his system of ethics. Kant explains it as such. So the universal imperative of duty can be expressed as follows. Act as though the maxim of your action were to become, through your will, a universal law of nature. Two common examples given are that of lying and stealing. If everyone lied or stole, it could mean the destruction of society, and so lying is morally wrong. If the absurdity of this view were not already evident, Dr. Peter Kreeft writes, Kant's criterion for a moral act according to the first formulation of the categorical imperative is universalizability. If you can make the maxim, principle, of your act universal for all, the act is good. But suppose you want others to be selfish or warlike. Suppose that makes you happy. Suppose you want universal adultery rather than fidelity, or universal war rather than peace. Kant's rule would not seem to forbid it. And so in reality, Kant doesn't really provide a true system of morals, as anything can be made universal if one so desires. We move then to our last Enlightenment philosopher which we will cover, the empiricist David Hume. David Hume was the founder of empiricism and preceded Kant, for Kant would later synthesize Hume with Leibniz. Nonetheless, Hume was a foundational Enlightenment philosopher, but his views tends toward a type of moral relativism. Hume seems to chalk up good and evil to our presuppositions, and they not having any real basis in reality. He writes, this is the second part of our argument, and if it can be made evident, we may conclude that morality is not an object of reason. Take any action allowed to be vicious, willful murder for instance, examine it in all lights and see if you can find that matter of fact, or real existence which you call vice. In whichever way you take it, you find only certain passions, motives, volitions, and thoughts. There is no other matter of fact in the case. The vice entirely escapes you as long as you consider the object. You never can find it till you turn your reflection into your own breast and find a sentiment of disapprobation which arises in you towards this action. Here is a matter of fact, but it is the object of feeling, not of reason. It lies in yourself, not in the object. So that when you pronounce any action or character to be vicious, you mean nothing but that from the constitution of your nature, you have a feeling or sentiment of blame from the contemplation of it. Vice and virtue, therefore, may be compared to sounds, colors, heat, and cold, which, according to modern philosophy, are not qualities in objects, but perceptions in the mind. So, for David Hume, morals are nothing but presuppositions that we feel are the case, but have no objectivity. Yet again, this becomes very evidently null, for it truly isn't even a system of morality. Hume would have no basis to refute the morals of someone attacking him, for in the eyes of the aggressor, his feelings are that his actions are good. Hume also encapsulates the spirit of the modern age, for morals are reduced merely to feelings and dispositions. Now that we've gone through a couple Enlightenment philosophers, you may say, well, I understand that they erred and the modern age reflects their thinking and judgments on morals, but what then is the solution to this problem of moral decline? Well, the solution is simple.
Gloria in excelsis Deo.
For a true grasp on philosophy and ethics, we need not to invent a whole new system which only causes more division in the world. We need a return to an objective basis, a true foundation in philosophy. And does no other place exist than that which is found in the writings of St Thomas Aquinas, who so wonderfully synthesized the thought of Aristotle with the Christian faith? As Pope Leo XIII writes, well, therefore we hold that every word of wisdom, every useful thing, by whomever so discovered or planned, ought to be received with a willing and grateful mind. We exhort you, venerable brethren, in all earnestness, to restore the golden wisdom of St. Thomas, and to spread it far and wide for the defense and beauty of the Catholic faith, for the good of society, and for the advantage of all the sciences. This objective basis serves as a point of unity in this so divided world, in which at every corner you turn, we have starkly different views of how things ought to be the case in morality. St. Thomas Aquinas has clearly stood the test of time, and many modern philosophers aren't even able to grasp the beauty of his metaphysics and theology. Now here we will briefly explain St. Thomas's view on morality. St. Thomas holds to natural law theory, meaning there is an objective basis of good which can be known by reason. St. Thomas, as a scholastic, holds to Aristotle's view specifically. Aristotle's view is based on the idea of final ends or purpose in nature. Aristotle writes, the end of something is what that thing is for. For example, the end of taking a constitutional walking exercise is to be healthy. And so, an example of a final end would be that of your heart pumping blood, meaning the purpose or final end of your heart is to pump blood. Now, a privation or lack of pumping blood from your heart may be called a kind of natural evil, as for example, a heart attack. But our actions also have final ends, and this is where St. Thomas is able to establish his moral theory. He writes, for every privation of good in whatever subject is an evil, whereas sin consists properly in an action done for a certain end, and lacking due order to that end. Now, the due order to an end is measured by some rule. In things that act according to nature, this rule is the natural force that inclines them to that end. When, therefore, an action proceeds from a natural force in accord with the natural inclination to an end, then the action is said to be right, since the mean does not exceed its limits, via the action does not swerve from the order of its active principle to the end. But when an action strays from this rectitude, it comes under the notion of sin. And so to go contrary from the natural end of something in your actions is for that thing to be immoral. As Father Gergout-Lagrange writes, for example, in accord with the inclination that man has, like every substance, to maintain himself in existence, we have the natural law requirement of preserving one's life. And for St. Thomas, it is therefore evident that the natural law is nothing else than the rational creature's participation of the eternal law, which finds its basis in God who is goodness itself. Therefore, the modern age needs not the vain philosophies of the Enlightenment, which only produced more folly, but it needs instead the angelic doctor St. Thomas, as Pope Leo XIII writes, but, lest the false for the true, or the corrupt for the pure be drunk in, be ye watchful, that the doctrine of Thomas be drawn from his own fountains, or at least from those rivulets which, derived from the very font, have thus far flowed, according to the established agreement of learned men, pure and clear. Be careful to guard the mind of the youth from those which are said to flow thence. but in reality are gathered from strange and unwholesome streams. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to help support the channel, consider becoming a channel member. As always, God bless.